Welcome to this episode of Arts First. It's the fourth episode, and so we're beginning to build up a bit of an archive that you can check out when you have time. We're committed to freedom of expression in the arts and arts for art's sake. My name is Wendy Earle, and in this session, I'm hosting an interview with two curators who have been involved in the battle for freedom of expression for quite a long time. And I want to explore with them what it means in practice for artists who find themselves facing censorship and cancellation and a kind of more invisible blocking and a risk-averse funding climate, and explore what that means in the context of the work they've done. Passion for Freedom is an organisation that has put itself in the forefront of the battle for freedom of expression over the last few years. And I want to talk to its co-founder about what that has meant in practice. I came across Passion for Freedom quite a few years ago when they had an exhibition on at the Pall Mall Gallery that was, I think, eventually stopped for so-called security issues. And the security issues were around the issue of a particularly controversial piece that Agnieszka might talk about a bit. And I met Manick many, many years ago, and we did quite a lot of work around Brexit together, which caused him to become extremely unpopular with the art world in which he worked. And subsequently, he's sort of been essentially, I think, in many, many ways blocked from doing his work as a curator, though he struggles on and got involved with the project in Warsaw. And that has proved a very interesting example of what we might call freedom of expression and the struggles that has involved for the people who are involved in doing the work there. So all will become clear in the course of this interview, I hope. I wanted to start off with asking Agnieszka about a bit of background of Passion for Freedom and why she got involved with it, what it has done over the few years. A couple of examples. I know you've done a lot, so you can't cover the whole ground, and hopefully people will look online, but a couple of examples that show what you have tried to do since founding Passion for Freedom.
Passion for Freedom, the origins go back to Poland, actually. The main founder, her name is Kamila Forrest, and I joined the project in 2010 in London. The origins going back to Poland started with an exhibition about the Armenian genocide, photographic exhibition, which suddenly was requested to move the venue by the local government. And Kamila, she discovered by calling the local government that actually there was a pressure from Turkish embassy to move this exhibition into a place that would not be so easily accessible to the public. So that prompted her to start asking questions. What is freedom, and how easy is it to lose it, and how hard is it to get it back? And actually, how many instances like this happen around us and we are unaware of it? And then when she moved to London, she was working in a radio station, and she did an interview with me because I just sold one of my artworks to a former prime minister during a charity auction. And that's how we became friends. And she invited me to a protest in support of women's rights against Sharia courts running in secret in Britain. That was in 2010. And I was really shocked seeing the scenes there, because that was the time when there was a group of women protesting Sharia courts in Britain. And for the first time, the authorities allowed the now banned, many times changing names, one of these groups that was run by Anjem Chowdhury. They had a counter protest separated from us just by the police force. And I felt really threatened by these guys, the posters they had about ending democracy and having a global Sharia law for everyone and so on. And for a woman, it doesn't sound too appealing, let's be honest. But for me, what was even more shocking that the next day there was no news about it in any form or shape. And I was discussing it with a work colleague, and I was told that, nothing big happened, so there was no need to report it. And I thought that the fact that there are parallel legal systems running in a country is already alarming enough for me. I don't need burning tires or anything like that to be alarmed. So Kamila actually was asking me about running an art exhibition competition to allow artists to discuss different topics that might not be in the mainstream news or awareness. And the main focus would be freedom of expression and freedom as such. And I joined as a curator. And then with time, as we were continued to work, I became one of the co-founders. And It's a voluntary-based organization. We are registered as a charity, and we've been running festival now for 15 years, mainly in London. But since 2019, as we are an international team, we've been also hosting festival in Denmark, New York, and Poland.
Could you say a little bit more about the work you did in London? Because that's when I came across you, and I think that would be particularly interesting for listeners in this country. But then also, I think it'd be interesting if you could talk about the work you did in Denmark, because I know that that was a rather dramatic experience.
Right. So we always saw festival as a vehicle to discuss issues around freedom. And it's also a bit like a test. You're running a test, how much freedom there is in the society. When I joined in 2010, there were a lot of viewers coming to the exhibition, questioning why do we do this exhibition in London, in Britain? We have freedom of expression, we have freedom of speech. But with each year, we were discovering how little freedom we have and actually how this is sucked out from the society. In 2013, we had a situation where the gallery canceled the contract with us at the last minute, a week before the show was to be staged, when all of the artworks were already in the storage place. And the excuse was threats. But obviously, there was no report to the police, no evidence. The money was just taken upfront from us, and the gallery venue was cancelled, and we needed to come up with the money in a new venue within a week. So we could say that we were at the forefront of cancel culture. We got cancelled before that was the thing. In 2015, the situation was even worse, because we, after taking part in a discussion on freedom of expression and blasphemy law in Copenhagen, where we were attacked by a jihadist with a semi-automatic weapon, one of the members of public that came to the discussion, he died, unfortunately, and the attacker went on to attack a synagogue in Copenhagen. We had an exhibition in September, and one of the artworks was created by Mimsy. It was a series of light boxes, ISIS in Sylvania. And we received an email from the gallery that they were contacted by Metropolitan Police, who pointed that one of the artwork is potentially inflammatory, and they would advise us not to exhibit this work. And if we choose to exhibit the work, we need to pay £6,500 for a police security a day. And obviously, quite a lot of us, being women from Central and Eastern Europe, we are quite cheeky and spontaneous. We decided that we're going to find the money, we're going to find a sponsor and pay for this police protection. Then more intimidation came, quoting one of the points in the contract that they can choose to look through all of the artworks and decide which ones are, again, problematic. One of them was an artwork from Taslim Mulhal about the treatment of women when they get stoned for various offenses according to the Islamic law. So that was quite interesting, because we saw that this is like a preemptive hidden censorship. And together with Mimsy, we discussed the issue, and we decided to not to show the work, but create series of postcards and give them to the viewers, showing them that what they were prohibited from seeing in the exhibition. And we were giving these postcards outside of the venue because we were aware that the gallery owners were watching every step we make, trying to find something to catch us, to break the contract and shut down the exhibition. And the exhibition in Denmark, because obviously for me, this is part of my life now, because since the terror attack, each new attack really shakes me. You know, your life is changed after surviving something like this. What was important for me is that I continued the meeting before we were evacuated. We were targeted together with Lars Vilks, a Swedish artist and art historian who was living in hiding for already, I think that was already 8 years at that time. And quite often in the mainstream media, they prefer to show him as someone controversial and not important, but actually it's one of the major Swedish artists. And I continued the meeting, and I pointed out to the audience that it's not only that they want to kill us, they want us to stop talking, so we should continue. Because I think this is the main point, that any force that tries to limit freedom of expression is not really just about our human bodies and killing us. It's more about stopping the conversation, putting people to sleep, making them ignorant, not allowing them to make their own mind and their own decisions, what is the best for the wider society, not just a small group of censorious authoritarian fundamentalists.
Thanks. Yes. I mean, I think one of the things your experience shows is that we really can't take freedom of expression for granted. And even in a country like this, the UK, where you think where freedom of expression is kind of a well-established principle, it is continuously being fringed upon one way or the other. So yeah, that's a really interesting sort of set of comments. Manick, do you want to come in and talk a little bit about your own experience of both being cancelled and block and how you became associated in a sort of like, I know it was quite a loose way, but initially, but then you and Agnieszka did end up working together in Poland. So I just wanted to kind of get a bit of a sense of the background of that.
Sure. So I suppose that things kind of came to a head at the time of the referendum on whether to leave the EU or not, so 2016. And my experience of being cancelled was, well, firstly, voting to leave the EU caused a lot of anger, a lot of resentment in the arts sector. I was working for a charity at the time that was been going on since 1979, received a lot of EU funding. So my position was obviously called into question. I was challenged frequently by the senior management on my decision to vote to leave the EU, and also campaign to leave the EU. So that made a very uncomfortable situation. Where things came to a head is obviously this territory of social media, where you are being vocal about your position and what you might like or dislike, and the kind of arguments that you have with, in my case, a lot of artists and a lot of curators and people working in the arts sector. So the cancel culture was starting to simmer. Although I wasn't sacked or cancelled, my life was made quite difficult in a regular full-time job. But my cancellation came to the pinnacle really in 2019. 3 years later, after the Brexit referendum, and that was really where I, in my kind of wry sense of humour way, defended women from attacks against pro-trans activists. And I was responding to an article in the Sunday Times. Someone who I knew then, again, creative artistic partner organisation, an individual from that organisation screenshot what I said and then put it out on social media. So it went viral. They tagged a lot of organizations that I was developing a freelance relationship with, because by then I'd left the organization that I worked for. And I was cancelled by 5 or so publicly funded arts organizations in England, because the screenshot was sent to them, and there was a Twitter group called Turfs Against Turfs Out of the Arts, who were pretty nasty. And so I would get these responses back from various organizations, from their human resource department, accusing me of being transphobic. So that, I think, really did bring it home to me that cancel culture exists, and it's not just the great and the good that they're attempted to cancel, but it's the precarious freelance arts worker and lesser known artists. So Brexit and cancel culture brought me closer to recognise what Passion for Freedom was doing. I'll be honest, I wasn't fully aware of Passion for Freedom, because working full-time in the arts takes over your whole life. So other interesting organisations are on your periphery. So I wasn't really associated with Passion for Freedom, but there were some artists that the festival exhibited or associated with. who I knew, who I was supporting in different ways as a mentor, advisor. People like Miriam Elia, Eka Epps, and I think one of your former judges, Sarah Maple, who I knew very well. So there were these crossovers between artists who were free thinkers, had a strong commitment to freedom of artistic expression, who in their own way were controversial, usually around issues around Islamism, and that's how we converged, from my perspective. So I was invited by, under the recommendation of Agnieszka, I was invited by the Ujazdowski Castle to give a lecture on cancel culture in the West. And that was in 2021, which was part of the public program that their controversial but very interesting exhibition that they had in 2021 at the castle called Political Art. So it is what it says on the tin. It was art and politics where they directly converge, and they're unashamed about that title. But what was different about political art was that it was the voices of many artists who you do not hear when you think about what is political art. So voices from Israel, from the Middle East, from Central Europe, from the Far East, and all of them were very much artists who kind of stood against state totalitarianism or religious intolerance, extremism, and that caused quite a great deal of controversy. I'm sure Agnieszka could say more about that.
I think what would be quite useful now is if Agnieszka could say a few words, just sort of setting the context in Poland. There was a conservative government that seemed to be more pro-free speech compared to the more liberal government that now exists, which, from what I've heard about your experience, is less free speech. But perhaps you could give a bit of background to that, Agnieszka, and then we could come back to the exhibitions you were both involved with.
In 2020, the first time I heard of the new director of Ujazdowski Castle was via a friend who sent me a screenshot of a tweet from New York Times that they'd just done an article about the new director being appointed by the conservative government, the director, Piotr Bernatowicz. And I remember that I was quite amused how in the article they were trying to portray him as some kind of a force of a ultra-conservative authoritarian government. And I was quite curious because reading between the lines when he was replying to the questions, it sounded to me that he's trying to do something new, actually. He's trying to give a platform to artists that are exploring different issues, and they might be from different sides of the political divide, or even they might be on a spectrum almost, that in a sense you cannot just say easily that they are on the left, on the right. They could be just on various issues, they can have different opinions. And then the curator from Denmark that we worked together, Passion for Freedom, and Lasse Kunsthal, Jon Erik Lundberg, he introduced us to Piotr Bernatowicz and the idea of doing a joint exhibition there called Political Art, as Manick mentioned. And that show was running from August 2021 to January 2022. And while the exhibition was being prepared, I went to Poland to visit my family, and I was positively surprised at how open-minded Piotr was, and also how curious he was, meeting artists, talking to them about the realities they live in, and about their artworks. And also I was encouraged by him being really unwavered in his support for freedom of expression, and how he would not bow to any pressure, because he showed works that were evenly critical, satirical of Islam and also the Catholic Church. So you could say that, some people would be very offended in Poland seeing some of the drawings of Catholic priests. But at the same time, he showed Lars Vilks's works, the one for which he received the fatwa, but also the artworks that he created as an artist living under threat of death in hiding. And I found it really interesting. And my dream is that everyone would be able to see his works that he created as an artist living with the police protection 24/7.
Maybe you could give a couple of examples of the exhibitions you worked on in particular, and then sort of like perhaps Manick could come in about the cultural trends program that you were involved with there.
So the political art show was running when I was still in Britain. I only moved to Poland in 2022, and that's when I started working at the castle. And while I was there, we started to develop more thorough program that would focus on censorship. One of the exhibitions Piotr did was going back in time, going back to the communist time, how the Polish artists were exhibiting despite of the threats, despite of the police state and different regulations that were prohibiting them from creating because they didn't have the official paper that they are an artist, or they couldn't buy the materials. And then from that, we moved on to highlighting artists that had difficulties exhibiting abroad. I curated an exhibition of Claudia Claire's ceramics called Feminist Satire, No Safe Spaces. And I came across Claudia's work when she's been cancelled for the third time for the wrong thing in the West. She's been a staunch supporter of women's rights all her life. She holds PhD, and still she was cancelled 3 times. First of all, for underlying the treatment of women under Islamic law. Secondly, for highlighting the rebranding of prostitution into sex work. And the final straw was when she started to highlight issues around transgender ideology and its influence on children's rights and women's rights and safe spaces for women. And also one of the exhibitions Manick curated was Miriam Elia's exhibition, and I think he would be the best to say more about that as he was the curator. But I think that was also a highlight of that program.
As I said, I knew Miriam Elia way back when she just graduated from the RCA and had lots of really quirky, exciting ideas. So had a real fondness and admiration for her work. So it was a lovely serendipitous experience, really, to be invited to curate Miriam's exhibition at the Ujazdowski, which happened last year. It was a really important exhibition for Miriam. It was the first institutional public-funded exhibition, in Poland, in Warsaw, and I think that faith in her work, which is, I would say, embraces popular culture. So the controversy around Miriam was being threatened with copyright action by Penguin Books back when she produced this brilliant and actually groundbreaking book called We Go to the Gallery, in the style of the children's Ladybird books, which has since been ripped off by Penguin subsequently with their own versions of these kind of slightly more kind of liberal parodies of Brexiteers and so forth. But Miriam was the pioneer in riffing off the Ladybird books being threatened, but for legal action under copyright, winning that through thankfully we have some clauses and exceptions for parody. So it was seen as a book or series of books that was gently parodying the Ladybirds children books. But I think what Miriam does is so important in that she brings her art to a popular public audience. It's not the elite, it's not the contemporary art cognoscenti and intellectuals, which means that some people did, as Agnieszka said, question whether she is an artist. One critic did question her status as an artist, particularly regarding why she was being exhibited at the Ujazdowski Castle as a centre for contemporary art. And the exhibition was very well received by Polish audiences and international visitors. You can see such joy and smiles in the public's face, and lots of selfies being taken. Miriam, I think, is a very important artist. She's, on one level, a kind of British pop artist of the 21st century, popular artist, populist artist. I think those kind of three areas blur in her work so well. But she does it with great gentleness, with humor. She pokes in a kind of very, kindly way, actually. And I think that does disarm the audiences to actually liking the work, even though they might be laughing at themselves with regards to the sort of progressive leftish culture that dominates the arts.
Thanks, Manick. So could you just say briefly about the cultural tensions discussions that you organised? Because I think those were exploring these issues around freedom of expression and the kind of what has become controversial now.
So after I gave a talk about cancel culture in the West in 2021, had a lovely informal meeting with Piotr and his assistant director, Marcel Skierski. And we got talking about the various kind of common areas of ideas around censorship, freedom of expression, the dominant trend in Britain and Europe of what is permissible in the arts and how we have to embrace certain, kind of theories around critical race theory, around trans activism, around the European Union and the kind of soft power ideology, maybe not that soft actually, the kind of ideologies that drives their funding programs in arts and culture. And I was invited to give a series of proposals for public discussions, and that was accepted. So that was wonderful. And so we started in 2022. We've had a range of public discussions, about 13 or so over the last 2 years, and touching on all the kind of issues that I think are kind of the kind of red alert buttons for that the arts do not like to discuss. Or if they do, they want to do it in a very positive, propagandistic way. So one discussion on art and migration, for example, we invited Miriam Elia, Feroza, forgive my pronunciation of her surname, Bakravan, and Taslim Malal from Britain, all, not too typical kind of Anglo-Saxon Brits or people coming from the Middle East, of mixed Asian heritage and so forth, talking about the perils of open borders and how the arts have a kind of blind ideological naivism about open borders and freedom of movement. We had other discussions on the European Union and how that affects Poland, but also Britain's experience of leaving the European Union. So all of these kind of, what as the title of the series is called, these culture tensions, we decided to tackle them head on and through very open, robust public discussions, which was very well received in Poland and internationally.
Okay, thanks. There's so much to discuss here. I mean, I imagine those discussions were fascinating, and I think they're available online so people can check them out. But Agnieszka, could you maybe move on to the sort of final stages of your experience with your association with Ujazdowski Castle?
Right. So first of all, I want to make a remark that it's not certain they would be able to find these discussions online because the management of the castle has changed. And looking at the history of what happened after the government change in Poland on the 13th of December last year, a lot of archives are being deleted and taken offline. So I don't know when this podcast will come out, but if you're searching for the discussions on YouTube channel from Ujazdowski Castle and you cannot find culture tensions, don't think there's anything wrong with you. Just be aware this is what happens when the liberal left government comes into power, claiming to reclaim freedom from authoritarian conservatives. This is what happens. So unfortunately, what we need to learn from this lesson is that whenever there is freedom and you can exercise it, enjoy it, exercise it, invite friends to show exhibitions, create, do everything you can because you don't know how long this will last. So we had this window of opportunity to allow artists from the West that cannot exhibit in the West to come and exhibit in Poland. That window of opportunity is slowly closing. At Ujazdowski Castle, it will not happen now. There's a temporary director there now. Apparently, there is a competition for a new one. We will see what comes next. But everyone was dismissed. Our culture tensions were cancelled. I received an email written by the secretary that it was just taken down from the program. No explanation, no thank you, nothing like that. You could just say that it was just, in a sense, it was just given to someone with no authority to write to you because you cannot write back because there's no point. There's no discussion, right? And Bernatowicz is planning to open a gallery in Old Town. I think there's a chance it's going to be free and open and functioning as long as Poland doesn't put through the hate speech laws as heavy as in Ireland. This is what's happening across the European Union. Hate speech laws are going into action online, offline, any sort of media, any sort of cultural activity. We have to be aware of that. And that's also happening in Britain. If the blasphemy law goes through under the disguise of Islamophobia, this is what will happen in Britain too. There will be less and less subjects we can tackle, discuss, and create artworks about. So we have to be watchful and open to looking for possibilities somewhere else, because what is important is to continue exercising our freedom of speech and expression and finding possibilities and ways of doing so. The warning signs of the fact that Piotr Bernatowicz would be dismissed and the program that he created, and he had a contract for another few years. The first warning signs that he would be dismissed came with the censorship of the Viennese Biennale successful entry of Ignacy Czwartos and his paintings. And I think that the issues with his paintings, why they couldn't be shown in Venice as a representation of Poland, was that they were touching on difficult aspects of Polish history, especially soldiers that continued to fight with the Soviets after the end of the Second World War, and also highlighting how a lot of Nazi criminals went scot-free after the war. And they had successful lives, whether in Germany or somewhere else. So I think that was the issue, because definitely not the quality of his paintings as a painter, not that the subject is not interesting to the wider public, whether this particular story or as a kind of a myth of people continuing to fight or people trying to seek the justice, because apparently this is a subject that is very popular now, trying to seek the justice for victims, but it just depends what type of victims. And that was the first sign that there would be changes in Poland. And part of me is quite sad, but part of me thinks it's better that people show their faces early on, so we have no illusions about who are they and what are they standing for. So that's what's happening now.
Yes, that's all fascinating. I mean, I think one of the things that's a bit scary these days is how even quite mild conservative notions get labelled as far right by a number of actors in the artist community. And that's one of the things I really want to explore a little bit more as we proceed over the next few months with this podcast. Manick, we need to be winding up. So are there any final thoughts you want to say? And then I think we'll probably finish it off then.
Yeah, it's dreadful that cancel culture has been cancelled by the new regime at the Ujazdowski. I think, these kind of moments these kind of glorious moments are to be treasured, because they are going to be inspirational to the next generation of free-thinking artists to not self-censor, to be open and tolerant about art and cultural discussions.
Thank you very much. So there's a lot of meat in this podcast, and I really would encourage, if you're interested in following up any of the points that have been made or the experience that have been discussed, I really would encourage you to look online for further information. And we'll come back again in the future with further discussions about the challenges to freedom of expression in this country and elsewhere. And I thank Agnieszka and Manick very much for being here and for talking about this, what must have been a very difficult experience for you both in the past couple of years. Well, both exciting and difficult experience for you both in the past couple of years. We look forward to hearing more about your work in the future. Thank you very much.